And thank you, Megan, for all the pre-work we did. I wanted to start, first of all, with a little bit of history of restorative justice. So not restorative practices per se, but restorative justice. And so I wanted to start there, and I did a whole lot of research. I know it's kind of funny, but I really needed to do some research. Get rid of this thing there. Okay. And the number one thing I wanted to mention was in 1978, and you guys may all know this, but I'm still in the learning stage. The American Indian Religious Freedom Act was passed. So if you think about that, this allowed Native American people to practice their ceremonies, circle being one of those things. 1978. So if you can imagine the disconnect from the beginning of colonization to 1978. It shocks me. It's hard for me to talk about it without getting a big lump in my throat. But once our Native American people were allowed to practice their ceremonies, there was a focus then on, I'm going to quote one little piece of it, religious practices of the American Indian, as well as the Native Alaskan and Hawaiian, are an integral part of their cultural, their tradition, their heritage, practices forming the basis of Indian identity and value system. So let me just say, value system is part of what restorative justice is. That is part of our Native American value system. So that was 1978. Took a little while to get things off the ground, but one of the first places where circles were practiced was in Boston by an organization called ROCA, R-O-C-A. My first training as a circle keeper was with their manual, the ROCA manual. I have that, and I'm going to give it to Megan, and if anybody wants a copy of it, I still think it's one of the best manuscripts that you can practice from. But ROCA was an organization, still is, in Boston that helped get young men who were involved with the justice system a new way of life, a new lease on life, to get them out of the justice system, and also for the young women that they were serving, young pregnant women that they were serving, to be able to get them help. And so at some point in the early 90s, the Tlingit tribe, which is the tribe over in BC and in some of the islands off the coast there, they offered to train the ROCA folks in restorative justice circle keeping. So this was, as far as I know, one of the very first times that Native people came over and said, look, you guys need to know how to do this. It's going to serve you really well. ROCA is still in business. If you're interested, I can get you more information, but they're a really fascinating group of people. In 1993, right here in the state of Washington, you guys may remember this because it made front page news. There was a crime that took place up in Everett. 2 young Tlingit tribal members came down to Everett for vacation with family. They committed a crime while they were here. They ordered a pizza and beat the pizza delivery person and stole from them. The Tlingit tribe came to Washington. Some of the senior members of the tribe came to Washington to talk about what we were going to do with these young men. They were asking for an opportunity to practice restorative justice. It was one of the first times, if not the first, I can't swear for sure, but that it was actually brought into a court and was used in sentencing. So if you want to read about that, it's a fascinating piece of history. That was 1993. I think the sentencing happened in 1994. The 2 young men were banished to separate islands that were uninhabited. So interesting. And so in the restorative justice circle that they had, they decided that that is what would happen with the boys. And the young man who was beaten received a house. He received housing for the rest of his life. It was built for him and he was able to live there. He was permanently injured from that crime. So that was 1993. I'm going to jump really quickly forward to 2015, some of you may know Judge Sinclair. Judge Sinclair was a Seattle, Washington judge. He retired not that long ago. And Jimmy Hung. I think Jimmy Hung was the prosecuting attorney for the juvenile department in 2015. And he and the judge got together and said, let's use a restorative justice model for this young 15-year-old man who had committed a crime. It was a serious crime. I believe a weapon may have been involved, but it was a theft. And he was going to get roughly 2 years of prison term if they didn't use a restorative justice approach, which they did do. And the sentencing was that young man would do approximately 100 hours of community service and be the support person for the next young man to come through in a restorative justice circle sentencing project. So he had to do a year of his own restorative circle, and then he did another, the next person who came through the pipeline, he was their support person in their restorative justice circles. Anyway, I don't want to go on and on because I don't want to waste any time. Another just little tip is if you haven't read Touching Spirit Bearer, it was written in 2002. It's a great little book. It's a young adult novel, but when you read it, you will see that it follows very similarly to the crime that took place in Everett. It's just interesting information. The next book, there is a sequel that was written in 2008, Ghost of Spirit Bear. I haven't read it yet, but Ben Michelson is the author of those two books. Fun reading. I think I just did it, the first book in one sitting. It really is. I'm seeing Russie's shaking her head. Yep, it's a good read. You'll enjoy it. It's fun. So what I wanted to do, my idea for this was to talk about what is restorative justice. So most of us understand, or at least we have a concept of why restorative practices are so important. If we don't have relationship with people, if we don't have that, why do we care about the impact of what we do? I mean, that's the number one thing with restoration or restorative practices. But restorative justice is a different baby. It's an entirely different subject. I've sat with circle keepers, will say, give me a circle any day. I'll meet with anybody. We can do whatever, but don't give me a restorative justice. It is a very, very big task to take on as a facilitator. And so understanding why that is so important. So I looked at a bunch of videos. I found two really short videos. One shows a video where there is a harm doer who is a specific, we know this person committed this crime and we're going to deal with it in that way. We're going to hold them accountable, etc. The other one is more, it's harder to see, okay, who's the harm doer? How do we handle that? What different ways would we handle that? Dramatically different ways, potentially. But I'll talk more. I think we should go right into that, those two little videos, and then we can talk a little bit more. We can have a more open discussion.
Before this face-to-face conference, it's essential the facilitators meet with the victim and the offender several times to risk assess them and to discover their needs and expectations. Successful restorative justice depends on managing outcomes that are realistic for all parties.
We're here to discuss the burglary that took place on the 23rd of March at the house of Jill. Now, this meeting is not to decide whether Joanne is a good or a bad person. It's to focus on what she's done and how her behaviour has affected you. And hopefully through this process we can all help to heal the harm that's been caused by the burglary. Right? So the ground rules, everybody knows them. I've explained to you the number one is no interrupting. Joanne, would you like to tell Jill what happened?
On the 23rd of March, we broke into your house, got in through a window, just random, just knocked on the door, no one was in. I can't remember loads about it, but I remember going in and taking a jewellery box. I think it was quite a big jewellery box, and I remember emptying it into a carrier bag.
What were you thinking about at the time, Joanne?
Just thinking about getting some money to fund my drug habit. Just wanted to get in and out there quick, just... I don't know.
Do you want to talk about how this has been for you?
For me, the hardest part was that you took my jewellery and didn't take things that were of no emotional value in my house, like the laptops and cameras. You took all my jewellery. So it wasn't the things that were of any value monetarily, it was things that my children had bought me, which are gone and were irreplaceable. It was, all my memories are gone. A funeral of my family. My children are gone in half an hour when you were in my house. So I was devastated. Absolutely devastated. I'm sorry. I know what I say can't really, replace any of the things I stole. I just want to apologise. I didn't ever think of the consequences. I think that's the problem, isn't it? Yeah. You know, your actions have affected me and my family a lot. I do actually think that the time in prison has really helped me to sort myself out. I'm really sorry. If I could replace any of the jewellery, I would. But you can't.
What would make things better for you personally? What would you like to come out of today's meeting?
Well, I think, I suppose I've had it, you know. Joanne's apologised. She can't make up for what she did, I know that. But you have apologised. I won't give back what I lost, but I think, yeah, I think she understands. I do.
Joanne.
Thank you, Megan. So that gives you an idea of what it's like to know that somebody has committed a crime and they show up, and how you might be able to respond, or at least some of the feelings that you're going to experience, because I think they did a really good job of taking you through that roller coaster of the feelings that you're going to experience in an actual restorative justice circle. And then we'll look at this other one where it's a little bit more obscure. Who is the harm doer or not?
We're here today because we all...
I know it's wrong, but it feels so...
Shake a leg, the brainstorm's kicking off in the boardroom.
No, it's in Miro.
were in somewhat impacted a part of the incident that happened in the cafeteria yesterday. So I want us to give y'all a space for us to address that and speak up the harm that was done and like what do we need to kind of move forward. Because it definitely had an impact on us as individuals, but us as a community. So let's address that. So right here I have a talking piece in which it allows everybody to just have a voice, right? And we kind of respect that within this space, that person that has the talking speed has the floor at that time. Ensure that everybody's being attentive and listening, respecting the circle. I'm going to pose a couple questions, and each of y'all could address this question. You don't have to. Sometimes it's just best to be an ear than a voice, so there's no pressure in doing just that. Okay, so the first question I pose to you all is just, can you describe the harm that was done, any harm that was done yesterday, or how it impacted you or our community in any way?
I'm frustrated because everyone feels that their issue is everyone else's issue. Like, I came to school to learn and get my education.
I was put in an uncomfortable position. They were my friends. If I jumped in, I'll get suspended, and I can't get another suspension.
When things like this happen, I just feel like there's no point in coming to school. It's a waste of time.
I feel mad and sad because the fight now ruined our whole school day, man. Like, now everyone's gonna talk about it in school.
I see a lot of drama outside of school, and I just wish school was just a safe place, and it doesn't feel like it.
Honestly, my reputation. I mean, I don't want somebody to sound like I'm weak or walk all over me, but I see what you guys are saying, I see how you feel, and I'm sorry that I made you guys feel this way.
I don't know what to say, really. I just know that it's not a good thing. I don't want either of you to get hurt, and I don't want either of you to miss school. And I like to graduate with you, but if you guys get in any fights, we won't have that moment together. It's such a small thing, but it can have a very much bigger impact on everyone. So.
Once you fight, it's just like a game of tic-tac-toe. If I curse at you, you're gonna curse back. If I hit you, you're gonna hit back. If I knock you down, you probably gonna grab a gun. In a fight, there's no winner. Either if I'm in jail or she's dead. This school needs more like a group or a prevention for violence.
Well, I see there's like an array of harm that we can describe in emotions from those that feeling that, you know, their education has been kind of stripped from them, their safety, right? And we talked about a reputation as well. I'm glad we were able to bring that to light. And let's talk about like, go forward. How do we go forward here and speak of like, what can we do to make things better? So my next question for you all is, what do we need in the school to make things right?
I just want to say that I forgive you, because I wouldn't want you to make me feel that way. I know it seemed as much weak, but I understand if you would walk away, I would respect you more.
I think it takes a strong person to walk away from a fight.
I think Rashad is right. We have to stop this before this gets any worse.
It sounds like we really care about each other in our community, and I heard people say, like, I want to graduate with you. And so in moving forward, thinking about that, like, how do we hold each other up? Rashad spoke about this programming. What does that look like? Who's going to lead that? And when I'm sitting in this room, I see all of these leaders around the circle who really care about their community and keeping it safe. Even someone who the other day might not have been seen as a leader, who today can be. So just moving forward, I want you guys to think about that.
Thank you again, Megan. So you can see a pretty dramatic difference between that first circle and this circle. And so my big question is, and what I think would be a good thing to talk about, if anybody has questions, by the way, if you want to put your hand up or if you want to put them in the chat, that's fine. And we can address a little bit right now. But my question is, what are the things that impact a positive outcome in a restorative circle? So like in circle number 2, what do you have control over as a facilitator to ensure that that circle doesn't go sideways? Now I can list you the things that I've come up with over time and that would be fine, but then I'm just listening to myself talk. But I really think that's really important. And I am always learning about what that looks like. Like, what is it that I have control over as a facilitator that is going to help these people get where they need to go. And so that was the biggest reason why I said, I really want to do this. I really want to have this conversation. So we're going to break into small groups, but is there anything that somebody wants to say at this point that they have strong feelings about, or that they want to ask at this point? Okay. Group discussion over. I can continue to talk. Would it be helpful if I talk more? Or is this a subject where you're like, oh my gosh, I already know all this stuff. Why is she talking about this? Because if that's the case, then we can just break into little groups now and you guys can talk more. Tell
Okay,
me
so
what you think.
Sue,
Yes.
I can give you some fodder with which to work. And that is to share my experience of watching the second video and having this really strong kind of feeling, or also like you could almost see how important it is in these kinds of situations, as the one that was depicted in the second video, probably the first one too, but to be able to invite people to step out of isolation or separateness. And so it's almost like we get stuck there. And when we're stuck in our separateness, you know, then the resources that we have to fulfill, you know, what we need, the strategies that we use, the deck of cards we have in our hands can result in these damaging behaviors. And what I took from this, particularly the second one, was that people that were in that situation were being invited to join with and have not companions even, but it's like to be invited into, okay, here, this is corny, the circle. But at any rate, yeah, it just struck me. It really struck me. And it reminded me of when I was a kid in grade school, and there would be these things about, well, you're gonna be in a fight after school, so with so and so, and this and that, and then I'd have to be like that kid, you know, I have to be Mr. Tough Guy, and then out of that would fall all kinds of, you know, crazy stuff as I try to fulfill my perception of a male sex role, and so, but to be invited into relationship with the people that I'm with, I think it's a bit like an antidote to what's that, Lord of the Flies, or yeah. So anyway, I don't know if there's anything to talk about there. I suspect there might be.
Thank you, Marcus. I think you have a really strong point there where people, if they can feel like they're on the same side, it seemed like that's what the facilitators also encouraged, that they are together. The whole idea about graduating together. And I saw somebody put in the chat, I didn't read all of it, but somebody asked about the videos. And I think Megan will send out the videos to everybody, those 2 videos, and you'll be able to see the end of the first one as well. And anything else that you want. I'm happy to just everything that I've discussed today, I can send out as well. I guess, are there any other questions that I should be addressing that are in the chat?
Maya had a question.
Okay.
Yeah, it just got me thinking, especially the second video about, and this commonly comes up in, you know, standard mediations as well, but when no one is willing to accept responsibility for causing harm, that can sometimes be a roadblock to moving forward. So it just got me thinking about what are some ways that it is possible to move forward without anyone having to say, I was the harm doer?
Mhm. Thank you. That's a really, really good question, and I can answer it from my perspective, but it's worth having a discussion about that. Number one, I have this theory that no matter what happens, you put the situation back on the people that were involved. So it's not ever that I'm going to have an answer, but if I can figure out the question that puts the situation back onto them, they will ultimately come up with an answer. My theory is if it's a situation like in that first one where you're going to interview people at least once, if not more, before you bring them together, I try to help people understand. Now, not the first one where there's a crime, there's an absolute crime, but in the second one, what accountability do you have as a person that was in the room? So not even just the people who were anticipating a fight, but everybody is responsible. A little bit like what Marcus was just saying, we are all in it together. So even in, and we've done just dozens and dozens of these where you have a group of people in conflict, either a business office or a homeowners association or whatever, every single person in the room can hold themselves accountable on some level to the outcome. If they're part of the system, they're part of the issue. So even all those kids in the cafeteria at the same time, they may not actively be part of the problem, but what part have they played? What part could they have done better? And once people start to get that, I could have done something better. I could have been supportive with the kid who feels like he has to fight because otherwise he's not going to be respected, for example. If they can understand what part they played, big, small, whatever it is, they can be a part of the solution. If you can't figure out how you got there, how are you going to figure out how to get out of it? So there's my 2 cents about that. I hope that answered it pretty well.
Looks like Alicia has her hand up.
Oh yeah, Alicia.
I would say, just to add to that, I think the fact that there was a bit of that vagueness about who caused the harm was a way that just shows one of the powers of the facilitator in the questions they ask, the wording, the answers they're seeking, in order to progress the circle. From at least my perspective, it seemed like they were really trying to emphasize the community aspect. That was a word that was utilized a lot. And so they're looking at it from that approach of not individuals, but as a whole, like we've discussed, to also not talk about only like who did what, but how the harm was collectively felt. And all of that just goes back to showing how intentional you need to be as a facilitator to see, why are we here? What are we trying to understand? Not necessarily solve, but just understand from one another in order to see how we can potentially find a solution to whatever grievance there may be. And it's just a very powerful component of the facilitator.
Absolutely. Thank you, Alicia. I was going to say also, if the people that you're bringing together don't have a very, very clear understanding of the basic rules of circle format, then you have the possibility of it turning into a back and forth conversation, which it is not that. So if it ever starts to flip into somebody saying, pointing across the room and saying, if so-and-so hadn't done this or that, I've had this happen before. If she hadn't said this or that, I'd be good. Everything would have been fine. So if there's not a super clear understanding of what the rules are, or the etiquette is, I should say it that way. I hate rules, but the etiquette in a circle is very specific. And so if people have missed that, if for some reason they didn't understand, or you didn't take the time to clarify what that etiquette is, or you didn't meet with people, or you didn't anticipate how rough it was going to be, and you didn't meet with them ahead of time to have those conversations. Those are 2 big things I find can be a problem. Anybody else, either questions or comments? So I think, I don't know what, if you guys would rather hear me just talk some more, or if you want to have mini conversations with each other about what did we decide was the prompt, Megan?
I'll put it in the chat. We discussed a prompt of what are your concerns going into a circle where restorative justice is the expectation?
Does that sound like something you guys want to talk about? I think it's a fabulous topic. I mean, it really, really interests me. So maybe we do that for about 10 minutes. And then when we come out, there'll probably be a whole lot more fuel in the fire, so to speak.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and open the rooms in just a moment here. Checking on things. All right, so you'll have a 10-minute timer. You can always hit the little button in the bottom right-hand corner to come back to the main room if you have any questions. And here we go.
Thank you for that, Megan. I was mid-sentence. I was saying something that was going to change the history of the world. And
Can
now
you finish it now? Can you finish it now, please?
Yeah, can you say that whole sentence? We want to know.
Yes, okay. So the whole thing was, I had read, and I believe it was in Mediating Dangerously, about belonging. So we've had a couple of circles lately that were very, very contentious between situational, between gangs, between teams, between people. So belonging is as important as breathing and eating. And I'm not just making that up. If you don't belong with someone or to some group or to some community, you will create that. So worst case scenario, you have kids creating gangs because they have each other. As kinky as it is of a way to connect, it builds connection. And if you have to have it, you will create it. One of the number one ways of creating that is having a shared enemy. Now, there are 3 or 4 ways of creating that belonging. There's the way of being in the same community. So all of us are in the same community. We all speak the same language. We all make the same food. We love each other. We belong to that community. It's great. It's wonderful. But if you have to create a way of belonging, and this is referring to the second circle where the young man was talking about not wanting to be disrespected, etc. If you're creating a way of belonging and you belong to a group that comes to school and fights, or you have to fight to be who you are, and you create that way of belonging, it becomes more and more and more important to you. So that is where he's coming from. And he's not saying those words, probably doesn't even know that's what he's creating, but that's why he's creating it. So as the adult, you can look at that and you have full understanding of, so you're fighting for what it is that your belief system is your way of belonging to whatever that is that you're fighting for. So if you can ask a question that breaks it down so people can see that, you're really doing good. Like, you just do whatever you have to do to allow that. We were in a circle the other night that was two groups of people fighting, and it was big time. It was very serious. And just talking about that and breaking it down with the teenagers also really helped the adults to see, why do they do this? Why do they do it? Why does it always escalate to the point where they have to prove that this group has each other's back? Because that's what they're really doing. I love you so much, I'm going to go beat the heck out of these other people because they're the thems. Anyway, I feel like I'm talking too much, but if you can see what's really happening, if you can identify what's really happening and ask them questions so that they can verbalize what you know is actually happening under the surface. It's beautiful. It's a gift from God. I'm being funny, but it is a gift. It is a gift if you can figure that out. Anybody else have any comments or questions or feedback or report back?
I had a question.
Yes.
Yeah, Andrew from Community Mediation Services down in Clark County, all that. So just thinking about those terms, you know, restorative justice, restorative practices. My question essentially, like, what I'm as we had our discussion in the group, and you think about bringing restorative justice into into that session, into that setting. What is the relationship of those terms? So just asking to the group, is one an umbrella term that the other resides in? So it's like, is it what's all restorative practices, but when you do the specific thing, it's restorative justice, or vice versa? Or are they two kind of co-equal things of some other umbrella that we don't have a term or discussion of? Does that relationship question kind of mattered a lot to just to understand the relationship, the two terms?
I would just say, is that an open question? Because does anybody here want to
Open
answer?
question for the group.
Thanks, Andrew. Anybody?
I can answer that. So actually, it's something that Sue-Ann and others at Kitsap DRC do cover in like their various trainings, like restorative restorative mediation circle training, I think is the acronym. And please correct me if I'm wrong, Sue-Ann. Restorative justice is a type of restorative practices. Restorative practices is that umbrella, exactly. And there are different types, and restorative justice is a niche of that. So, yeah.
Thank you, Alicia. I think that's pretty accurate. Or very accurate. I have to throw this out there because I think this is really, really important. After seeing what restorative justice could do, it was the reason, it was my thinking of why we needed a restorative circle practice of mediation. So we do, like you were saying, Alicia, we do a restorative mediation circle type of thing. And one of the first basic concepts that people have to understand, and this goes back to the idea of community, is that you're part of a system. So if you're in an office with 8 other people and you're all working in that office and you're in conflict with those people, everybody in that group of 8 people is part of that system. Every person has some role. And I'm not saying every person's doing a bad thing. Every person does something that doesn't make it better, whether it's simply gossip, whether it's listening to gossip. Are you kidding? I'm such a good person. I would never gossip, but everybody comes to me and tells me what they think. I'm like, okay. So everybody has a role in a system. And I know systems theory is a whole thing. It's way over my pay grade probably, but but I do get it in that respect. A system, a group of people, a family is a system. You know, all the people that write those books about families, you know, there's 7 kids in the family. What's the difference about kid number 1 between kid number 2 and kid number 3 and kid number 4? The middle child syndrome, the firstborn syndrome. It's because they are part of a system and they get kind of classified in a way. And in an office, it's the same thing. In a tribal community, everybody plays a role, and plays isn't even the right word. Everybody has a role. And we, if you can kind of understand that, it makes the conflict easier to deal with. It's not just if you fired Peter, because Peter is the problem. If you fired him, everybody else is going to be groovy. No, everybody else is going to go back to either gossiping or not gossiping or listening, or it's still going to repeat the same exact thing until people hold themselves accountable to where they are in relationship to the group. Anyway, these are some complex things, but honest to gosh, it's how you respond to conflict. Even in that circle, if you can create the response that you're looking for as a facilitator, you encourage the response that you're hoping for. Whatever that is, open-heartedness, compassion, you encourage that. If your questions can encourage that, you're going to be in a better place. They will be in a better place. You'll just be sitting there. Any other thoughts?
Sue Ann, thank you.
Hi.
Well, in our little group, one of the things that we were touching on was as a facilitator, if things do start to go sideways in the circle, for example, let's say there's a teenager and there's a restorative circle for a teenager, and I saw this happen a little bit in one restorative circle that I was participating in. And I remember thinking to myself, if I was the facilitator, what would I do? And I didn't really know.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was remembering that in our breakout group. So if I'm remembering correctly, one of the parents had the talking piece and was clearly still very upset with their child for misbehaving in some way or causing harm.
Mm-hmm.
And so they started to go into what I felt was shaming and blaming. And I felt that, clutch in my chest.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just kind of an example of, how it can go sideways. But I'm wondering if you or somebody else in our group this afternoon could speak to that. Like, what would you do if you were a facilitator in that case and you do not have a talking piece? This other person does.
Thank you for that, Lorraine. And this is, in my journey of learning, I've responded to that situation a number of different ways. My first and most profound learning was that you never interrupt somebody who's saying what they need to say. That was my first learning. So I kind of went with that in the beginning. I still believe that I hate to interrupt people. I do, however, if that were to happen tomorrow, I would say, can I have your attention just for a moment? Is anybody being harmed with the words that you're choosing to use right now? Because we agreed that no harm is going to happen in this circle. This is just a fundamental value of this kind of work. So do you believe that there is no harm being done by the words that you're choosing right now? One time in the beginning, probably 10 years ago, when I was in a circle and that happened and this person just said some awful things about their own child, I did not say anything because I was believing in my IIRP training that said that never interrupt a client in a circle. I didn't. But guess what? The next adult who got the talking piece turned around and said, what you just did was unforgivable. You hurt your child and you insulted us. And I'm like, okay, I didn't have to say anything, but there was somebody else in the circle. The circle takes care of itself, right? There was somebody in the circle right next to this woman who said, you don't get to do that and have me be a witness. And I thought that was beautiful, and I didn't reprimand her either. I did not interrupt, just like I believed I wasn't supposed to interrupt, but it took care of itself. So it's kind of, you have to make that decision. But like I said, the way that I would handle it tomorrow is I would ask that person, do you believe that you're not causing harm by what you're saying? And see what they say. And that kind of does interrupt things, and I would normally not interrupt the flow. You're absolutely right. But you can't, as a facilitator, watch harm. I mean, I got better things to do. I could go home and watch TV. I mean, seriously, there's better things to do than anything is better than that. Chris.
Thank you, Sue. I just wanted to piggyback off of what you're saying. And, for me, it's reinforcing the group expectations and values. If the circle, if the attendees don't take care of that themselves, then I would do the same. I would do what Sue was suggesting, if she had to do it tomorrow, I would pose that very same question, but I would frame it around the values and the expectations that the group put forth.
Thank you very much, Chris. So I think we're just about out of time. Is there any last words of wisdom? And I will send Megan whatever it was that I blathered on about today that you might want to look at, and she can make sure you get it. I know that's what you usually do anyway.
I'm happy to share out resources afterwards. I just put in the chat, this will be in the follow-up email as well, but for the first video link, they're both on YouTube, and the second video link. And Sue Ann, did you want me to put that TEDx talk in there as well?
Oh, yes, yes. Judge Sinclair, who we have a lot to be proud of. Judge Sinclair was a wonderful judge in Seattle for many years, and he did a TED talk regarding that situation that I spoke to you about. And it's like 12 minutes, definitely worth hearing him. Is a wonderful guy.
And Sue, you mentioned something about the Roca manuscript on circles.
Yes.
Is that something that we can be put in touch with?
Absolutely. I'll send that to Megan as well.
Yeah, and thank you, everyone. If you put your email address in the chat, I will send out that information that I'll get from Sue Ann and these video links and the recording session for today. And we also have an ongoing session link that was in the reminder emails. I'll put it in the chat as well. So you can check out materials from any of the sessions that we've had so far. And we are taking a bit of a hiatus coming up. Oops, I'm looking for the link at the same time as I'm trying to talk. Doesn't always work well. We're taking a bit of a hiatus for the learning cohorts for the summer. And so we likely will return, we will return, the timing to be determined, likely in September for the restorative practices learning cohorts. So thank you so much for making these a really rich experience over time. I know I've really enjoyed engaging with them. And thank you, Sue Ann, for preparing and leading today's session.
Absolutely. Anytime. Loved seeing all you guys.
Thank you all. And Restorative Practices Committee members, if you're available, you're welcome to stay on for a 15-minute debrief. And for all the rest, we will see you out and about on Zoom in the future.